We're all here.
Yes, Chairman.
A little bit of housekeeping before we start. If you can use the raised hand function, which you'll find on the screen on the iPad, I can keep a track of who's next to speak and talk and do everything. Chris has raised a hand.
Sorry, apologies. I'm just trying to find the raised hand thing. My apologies.
Not you, Councillor Rose. I can see everybody's faces on my screen, so if anybody waving madly, I'll come and get you.
Thank you.
Chris Morby's raised his hand.
Right. Seeing as though you're all complete, I'm going to leave you.
Okay, Chris.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
The other thing to say is it's obviously been streamed live on our YouTube channel, and it will be there for posterity. So I'm sure we're getting thousands of watches for this particular meeting today. So yeah, raised hand, and if you can keep muted, and then when I ask you to speak, if you unmute yourself, and then when you finish speaking, if you mute yourself again, and also if you put your hand up and then decide that you don't want to speak, if you just take it back down again, otherwise I will come to you. And the beauty of Zoom is it does it in batting order, so I can see who's supposed to put the hand up, so I'll come to them people in order. On that note, we've obviously got members here, but we've also got people from the council team. So we've got Vicky Davis, who's the committee secretary, Annette Moffat, who is the legal advisor of the council, Richard Way, chief finance officer. I'm just looking through. Darren Maycock, IT. Deborah Davis, head of the Revs and Bends department. Going through Paul Ellis. I never know what you call Paul, but sort of deputy chief exec. Paul Shevlin, chief exec. Guy Close, who's head of democratic services. And I think that's all the officers. Everybody else that you can see is a member. Just say from that, with thanks for coming along at 2 o'clock today. We just thought we'd do it while we sort of have the full IT strength. If it went down or anything, meetings will revert policy to later in the day after this one. But we thought most people probably are still slightly locked down at the moment, so they had an opportunity to come and do the meeting. So on that note, we'll get on with it. And good luck, and bear with me as chair. It's the first one I've actually done live. So Vicky, item 1, apologies for absence and substitutes.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got apologies from Councillors Madeley and Heseltine and Councillor Soloway's substitute. But for the record, could we take a roll call of all the members that are present, if that's okay? So if I shout your name out, can you speak to say that you're in attendance, please? Is that all right if I do that, Chairman?
Yeah, you go ahead, Vicky. Yes, please.
Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Yes, in attendance.
Councillor Brockbank.
Here.
Councillor Ireton.
Present.
Councillor Liss.
In attendance.
Councillor Morell.
Present.
Councillor Mulligan.
Present.
Councillor Myers.
Present.
Councillor Noland. Need to unmute yourself, Councillor Noland.
Present. Hello.
Thank you. Councillor Place. Councillor Place. Can you unmute yourself, Councillor Place, just to confirm verbally that you're in attendance? It's just for the YouTube recording, please. Right, well, for the record, Councillor Place is in attendance, but he is having problems with his microphone. So I'll record him as being present. Councillor Rose,
Present.
Councillor Welsh,
Present.
and Councillor Wheeler.
Present.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Stephen will work out how to do it, I'm sure.
Okay.
Confirmation of minutes, members. I'll try and do this by consensus rather than a vote if I can. Just put your hand up if you've any comments. Councillor Place has got his tech guy in. Do you want to say present now, Stephen? So,
didn't call my name out, but I'm here as well. Andy Soloway.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Soloway. Yes, yes, Councillor Soloway. Thank you.
moving on, public participation. Do we know of any?
No, Chairman.
Thank you, Vicky. Declarations of interest on this one, members. Looking for hands. Nobody waving, nobody looking mad at me or excited, so we'll take it that nobody's got that. And then moving on to item 5, discretionary business grant fee. Are you taking this, Patrick, or?
Sorry, Richard, I was thinking you would take it.
Right, that's not a problem. I'm hoping everybody's had a good chance to read this. We obviously got the government grant initially, that 26 million, that was based on rateable values of properties and premises. I'm going to say it was relatively easy to follow up because we did have a list of businesses that do have business rates, but at this point, I'd really like to thank Deborah and her team, and I'm sure all of the members do, because they've done a fantastic amount of work, long hours, but best of all, they got that money out, and some businesses were really, really desperate for it. They were wondering, you know, where they were going next, how they're going to, some even how to put a meal on the table. So, superb piece of work by you and the team, Deborah. And I know, not just from members of the council, but from members of the public, the response has been fantastic. And you certainly put the council in a good light with a lot of businesses within Craven. So thank you very much. Well, we obviously did that scheme. Then the government came back and said, with some of the money we hadn't spent, 1.2 million around, we could basically go out and try and find the businesses within Craven that we thought we should be helping, but we haven't helped. So we got the windows cleaners going past. You don't get this in a council meeting, do you? So we basically tried to put a scheme together where we could hit as many of those businesses as possible that hadn't been in the previous scheme and hadn't been able to claim any grants anywhere else. And this sort of leads to the report that's in front of you now. And then I'll hand over now, I think, for the technical side of this report. Are you taking it, Richard or Deborah? Richard, so I'll hand over to Richard now for the technical speak.
Thank you. Afternoon, everybody. Yeah, as Richard said, there's been 2 lots of grant funding by government and 3 lots of significant business support that have been delivered through councils. So initially we had extended business rate relief, and that was followed up with a business grant scheme. And that first tranche, which for us is so far resulted in payments of over 20 million to businesses in the district, was reasonably well defined in that it was designed around putting the money out through the rating system. So we had, it wasn't straightforward, but at least it was built around a set of pre-existing criteria. And what's happened over the last few weeks and months really is, you know, through that process, a number of businesses and examples were highlighted who just missed out on that grant support or weren't quite eligible through the rating system for whatever reason it might be. And so the government came up with this additional scheme, which is actually really quite complicated. It does thankfully allow discretion at a local level, but the scheme that's in front of you, which is based on government guidance, does set out the type of business that it wants us to primarily and predominantly support. So they're sort of small and micro businesses, and it also lists a number of business types that we should prioritise, and they are bed and breakfast, market traders, businesses in shared space, and some charity businesses that haven't already benefited from support before. The other complication with this scheme is that we've been given a defined allocation of grant to distribute to businesses in the district. But because of the fairly broad nature of the types of businesses that it's intended to support, we don't know exactly how many people or how many businesses in each of those categories are potentially eligible. So we've got a fixed pot, but we've got an unknown sort of quantum of potential applicants. And because of that, and you know, in order to try to get the money out as fast as we can to the right businesses, you'll recall almost a fortnight ago now, we opened an application process to allow businesses to fill an online application in, which follows this draft scheme to allow us to at least start to analyse and prepare to make payments as fast as we can, subject to approval today, to the businesses that are supposed to be supported by the scheme. But like I say, it is complicated, because whilst it's quite prescriptive in setting the types of business we should prioritise and the types of business that it's aimed for, it does give that local discretion as well. That means that we can potentially look to provide and extend the support to some of the businesses who haven't already been able to benefit from some of that support. The only mandatory criteria that's set within the guidance is that the businesses must have been trading on the 11th of March, and they must not have received previously one of the other business grants. They're the two main criteria. There's other related points about those going through administration and what have you, but really they're the two main mandatory points that businesses have to comply with. In the report in section 3.6, again, following the government guidance, we've set out what types of grant support might be paid to the various types of businesses. Now, again, other than the two elements that are defined by government, that you can pay £25,000 or £10,000 or any amount up to £10,000, which sort of mirrors the high street retail, hospitality and leisure grant system that's previously been in operation. So you've got, it can either be 25 or it can be 10 or it can be any amount up to 10. And that's where we've got that discretion up to 10,000, which in 3.6 of the report, you can see the levels that we expect to be able to pay to businesses. But before we can finalise those, obviously, as well as checking the credentials of applicants, we need to see how many people, how many businesses are applying, to make sure that we can work within those financial thresholds, that we haven't got many more people than we thought would apply, and therefore we have to pay less, etc. So, I mean, just on that, as of today, and Deborah can perhaps help me out if we need more detail at the moment, we've had about 220 or thereabouts of reasonably valid applications. And we're working through those now to try and put them in the right category to get to a point where we can start to make payments subject to the scheme being approved today. The scheme sets out the appeals process that people can follow if they're not satisfied with the decision. And it also requires, in a similar way to the previous grant scheme, self-declaration around the accuracy of the data and the internal checks and anti-fraud checks that will be done post-payment. So again, in a similar way to the last grant scheme, the emphasis has been on making the payments as quickly but as safely as we can, and then there are post-payment checks as well, and that post-payment check includes cross-referencing across government, so it's not just looking at council data. So the intention is to, of that 200 odd applications that we've got, there are a batch of those that are reasonably straightforward in that they are quite clearly defined bed and breakfasts or market traders, and we're looking to make payments to those in line with the amounts that we've set out in the scheme, potentially by Thursday or Friday, assuming that we can agree the scheme today. And then there'll be another batch that we'll need to assess and categorise and compare to our funding available, and make recommendations to the lead member for finance and lead next week about payments against those criteria. So I think, Chair, at that point I'll stop unless there's anything Deborah wants to add that I might have missed on the detail.
Deborah, are you?
No, there's nothing, Richard. I think the latest figure is 230. I looked at the applications just before I came to the meeting.
And do we know the financial value of those 230, Deborah, roughly?
Well, the value is really whatever we want it to be. We've got 30 B&Bs and 17 market traders. So that's probably, I don't know, 180,000 according to the scheme. So that looks like it's leaving roughly $1 million for the rest, obviously to be divided up, however seems fairest. We're trying to look at, when Richard mentioned the categories, sort of maybe the hospitality sector, the ones that are still closed, because some have gone back already, and trying to do some rough groups and make sure we've got consistency between the different business types. That's where we will put them into some kind of groups and perhaps circulate, as Richard said, so that people can see and, you know, have an opinion on before we make any payments. The straightforward ones, we'll try and do those this week, really, just to get the money moving again.
Councillor Foster, you just need to unmute yourself.
Oh, I'm unmuted, sorry. I must have muted myself. I've got Councillor Wheeler, Councillor Noel, and then Councillor Myers. But before I do that, I'd just like to move it, if that's all right. There's two recommendations. So, Councillor Wheeler, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Just a number of questions, and hopefully, so I'll list all the questions, be easier. Once we've gone through all the businesses that are excluded from this scheme, have we an idea of how many businesses that would leave that are eligible for the scheme? And as a proportion of Craven businesses, what that would be? That's one question. In 3.6 of the actual document, it talks about the eligibility criteria. And I'm wondering, is there a possibility that some businesses that fall within that category have been refused the grant, one of those grants, or didn't go through with this? And if that's the case, is there some form of safety net that may allow them to claim this particular grant? And the other question is, I assume there'll be there's a finite deadline for this funding. Are we prepared to extend it if bids don't, if there's only a small proportion of businesses that have asked for it? And the other question, if the number of people applying and the amounts they apply for outstrip the funding available, is there an option of top up that we can do, or is it a finite fund with a finite deadline? Thank you.
Do you want me to have a quick crack? The scheme's extendable. We put a deadline on it to try and get as many businesses to come forward as quickly as possible. And then on the last one, Richard's going to, Deborah's going to answer the earlier ones, Mark. I can't. I've even forgotten what the last one was.
Do you want me?
No, sorry. Yeah, the pot is basically finite at the moment from government. I think if we found that we got a lot of businesses that we couldn't help, there is an option to go back to government again. We still will have some of the 26 million original left, and rather than hand it back to government, I think there'll be an ask to go back to Mr. Sunak and say, can we just keep a bit more and help out these 3 or 4 businesses or 10 businesses that have missed? But we've got to work within that 1.2 million pot for now. So, Richard, if you want to answer some of the first ones, or Deborah.
Okay, thank you. So the first question was about how many businesses are excluded from this scheme because they've been included in the original. Sorry, was that the crux of it?
Yes.
Yes, it was, and it was how many, how many businesses that are eligible is there to reach, and what proportion of Craven businesses will this group be? I'm just trying to get a sense of just how big the uptake could be.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that was really why we needed to do an application process, because in contrast to the first grant scheme, which was identified, or sorry, the quantum for that was set by businesses that were already known in the rating system. The openness of this scheme means that there are a number of businesses that aren't on the radar in terms of business rates. So we've got this fixed pot. We had a rough estimate of how many B&Bs, market traders and others that we knew about before we started, but we couldn't say for sure how many businesses that fall into the categories that they want to be prioritised are actually out there, because they might not be in the rating system. So we've got the almost 2,000 that have benefited from the business grants previously paid, and based on the numbers that Deborah mentioned earlier, that we could be ultimately looking at 250 or so by the time the application window closes for this scheme. But that's really why we've done it in the way that we've done it, because we've got a fixed pot and an unknown number of potential applicants. The way that we've geared the potential payments is to try to support as many as possible, and part of that is in response to representation that's been made by various business groups that something is better than nothing in a lot of cases. So we've tried to take account of that. One of the sort of areas that we would like to prioritise in terms of those that we want to try and support are some of those that have that didn't quite qualify under the Retail, Leisure and Hospitality Grant Scheme or the Small Business Grant Scheme, and there were a few of those that just because of the constraints of the rules of that scheme we couldn't make payment to, but potentially can under this scheme. So it'll be good if we can extend the support to those. The scheme as drafted is worded in such a way that because of those uncertainties I mentioned, we can do two things really. We can flex the amounts in some of those categories up or down if we want to, or we can actually go out again to advertise the scheme and do another round if we wanted to. So we'll be considering that over the next few days based on the number of applicants that we get when the window closes on Thursday. But I think going back to the original question, the amount, we've got a one-off amount, 1.215 million at the moment. As the leader mentioned, there is lobbying to try to recycle more of the unused grant from the first scheme among councils, but there isn't a decision on that yet. So as far as things stand today, that's the amount we've got, and this is this scheme is the method we're hoping to use to distribute it.
Your final question, Mark, was 3.6. And basically, if somebody still falls under that scheme, those schemes are still open. So Deborah and the team will be sending them down that route and telling them to go and get it out of that. So.
No, it's great. I mean, the scheme is great. You know, it's we should be applauded for putting this together. And I just hope that the publicity gets out there. So possibly there might be an extension of a deadline to be considered if we feel that whatever marketing we've used to get the message out isn't sufficient.
Yeah, that's one of the things we want to sort of delegate to us. So if we look like we're coming well under the money, then we can either increase the values, but we'd also look at extending the scheme as well, Mark, to make it so it's, to get as many businesses in as possible. The whole point is to help as many of those businesses that might be struggling out there.
I mean, is there anything that the local councillors can do within their local wards? Is there some sort of mechanism that we can somehow get the message out to our businesses that are within our villages that would qualify?
Yeah, but it's difficult if you miss one, isn't it, that you don't know exists. That's the only problem. But yeah, by all means, promote it to those that you do.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Nolan.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, until Richard mentioned it, charity shops didn't seem to be mentioned as part of the in any of the documentation. Could that be something we emphasise or make clearer that the charity shops can apply for this as well? That's all.
Is that one for Richard or Deborah?
Well, I'll start, and perhaps Deborah can finish off. It is a sector that's prioritised within the scheme. I think so it's there, and that they can apply, and they're a priority type of business. So they'd stand a good chance of success. I think what we found when we looked at that group was that most of them had benefited from the retail, leisure and hospitality grants anyway, so that there aren't, we don't think, a huge number that haven't already benefited in the district anyway. But it's quite clear in the scheme and in the promotions that we've been doing that the charity sector is one that is a priority for this scheme.
Do you want to go in on that, Deborah? I mean, have we missed any charities, or do we think we've got them all fairly well?
I think we've probably got most of them. We had a list originally under the initial scheme, and I think, I wouldn't like to say every single one, but certainly all but of the charity shops have had something under the original scheme if we knew about them, and there's no reason to suspect we didn't know about them.
Thank you. Councillor Myers and Councillor Brockbank.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, Richard, I'll second the proposal. Secondly, I think I'd like to thank Richard and Deborah and all in their teams for all the work they've done on this. And when the leader said at the outset of this meeting, it's not just us who are grateful, it's the public. I have been approached by numbers of members of the public to say how very pleased they were that Craven had pulled all the stops out to get the grants to them when they needed them. So, officers, you really are appreciated. I know it doesn't always seem like it, but this has really put Craven in a very good light. Thirdly, I'd like to make the point that I don't know how many councillors have read this in any detail. When you read it, it seems rather prescriptive. And I've had people in my patch say to me, well, I don't think I'm eligible. The whole point about it is it's discretionary, apart from the two matters that are set in stone that Richard has mentioned. And the upper limit on NNDR that affected a lot of businesses and made them ineligible doesn't apply for this. Now, it may be that in the script at the moment, it looks as though it does, but it's very important that we support big employers, strategic businesses, businesses that are able to assist the economic recovery of Craven. And those businesses should apply. Now, if they can't fit within the discretion, they can't. But they shouldn't just read it and think, well, we're not eligible. It's really important that that those who can and who've missed out elsewhere apply for it, because the fund's there to aid economic recovery as much as anything. And the final point, actually, Richard and Deborah, is a question somebody raised with me yesterday. Have we had taxi drivers apply? Because obviously they've been hard hit by this pandemic.
I would say there's certainly 3 or 4 that I know of. Obviously, I don't know how many there would be out there, but some are applying, some tax firms and some individual drivers. I mean, probably not more than 4 or 5 from a glance down the list.
Presumably some will have been self-employed, won't they, Deborah, and therefore claimed down that route and other routes. Who's actually getting savaged by the lion?
Yeah, it's not me.
I assume there's a dog fight going on at Councillor Myers' house. So taxi drivers can apply if they haven't received anything from anywhere else, is what we'd be saying, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and I think it's just important the taxi trade know, because they may not realise they may be eligible. I apologise for the Labradors playing. Sorry about that. I'll mute them.
Councillor Brockbank, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question was about taxi drivers, so I'm pleased to hear that taxi drivers can apply. I'm hoping that our taxi will apply. I have had a word with him yesterday, and so really that was my question. But there was a question that I asked Richard Way about some time ago, and that was about a concern about market traders. Market traders move from place to place, from district council to district council, and I was just a little bit concerned that they might be able to, and not that they would, but that there might be the opportunity for them to apply for this type of grant more than once. And Richard's reply was that you would be checking that. Am I correct? Is that right, Richard? That you would be checking that to make sure that they hadn't applied more than once for whatever reason, you know, just maybe even out of not really understanding the process, perhaps.
Yes, that's right. In the scheme itself, Section 6 goes into some detail about what constitutes a market trader that will be eligible. And there is a clause in there about certifying that they trade primarily within the council's area or have a fixed business base within the council's area, and that we wouldn't pay a grant if they've received one from somebody else. So that's within the scheme, but there may well be exceptions that we might think about if somebody does, you know, 2 days in Craven or a day somewhere else, and you know that might be something we consider as part of the discretionary element of this, because we've said that we pay up to £2,000 for market traders, so that doesn't mean they'll all get £2,000. So that, you know, that there might be examples where it's fair to make a smaller payment to somebody who you know, may trade here less frequently, but the scheme sets out, you know, that that's the criteria that we'll follow, you know, that so that they shouldn't expect a payment from us and other councils as well. But there might be some, you know, exceptional circumstances where we think it's appropriate to make some kind of small payment.
Thank you, Richard. Belinda, yeah, Councillor Soloway.
Thanks, Thanks, Richard. I mean, just to the point about taxi drivers, I mean, we've got a licensing committee meeting tonight. Just maybe it will be worth us putting the word out to our local taxi drivers who've lobbied us over things that we're making a decision on what they're facing, and it kind of works both ways, really. I've actually been amazed by which businesses have managed to stay open through lockdown, and which businesses that are very similar haven't. It really, I mean, we look at the market, and there's been 4 market traders who've almost traded all the time, and there's others who are not there, and similar shops. One's opened, one hasn't. Maybe they're shielding and things like this, but I'm actually amazed by which businesses have managed to stay open, and kudos to them as well. But yeah, if we can promote it to more difficult to reach groups, because I think some taxi drivers are a little bit more difficult to engage. Yeah, that would be good, something to promote anyway.
Yeah, I think when you do that, do explain that if they've already claimed for one, they can't claim for the other. I think that's crucial, because a lot I'm hoping would have gone for the self-employed one, or been furloughed by the firms as well. So.
Sorry, Richard, they've changed the guidance on that. So initially when this scheme was drafted, if you'd claimed the self-employed support, you couldn't claim for this, but you can. Right. So they would be entitled. It's only if in some way they've been entitled to one of the other business grants that they can't apply for this.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, so that told me. The final thing is, I know we've done it, and it is a very prescriptive form. Would it be worth, if we are going to go out for a second round, that we actually give some examples of businesses we're willing to help, such as one that's paying just over the 51,000 or a bit over the 51,000 of business rates, such as maybe somebody who's a firm that's paying themselves dividends, but in actual fact it's had, the coronavirus had a massive effect on the business, and they can prove it. If you know what I mean. I read through it, and it took me a bit of time, and I've sort of been reading through all these forms to understand it, and I can imagine. I know it's there 25 grand or 10 grand or 2 grand or whatever it is, and they should try, but some people just do not think reading our form, we're very unsure whether they were entitled or not, or could be entitled.
Yeah, I mean, we've tried to keep the form itself as straightforward, but the problem is the scheme is inherently complicated anyway, because on the one hand you've got these criteria where you've got to prioritise and predominantly support these types of businesses. And then tucked away in the corner of the policy somewhere is this bit where you've got discretion as well. So it's neither one thing or the other, really. And because we don't know how many people are out there. So I think what we need to do initially is see when the window fully closes by the end of the week. As I was saying at the start, there's a group that we think we can probably pay quickly, potentially even before the end of the week. And then we need to see what the rest of the applicants look like, and some analysis really of whether we think there are particular types of business or sector that haven't applied that we know about that we might want to encourage if we did a second round. But I think there's a number of things we need to be clearer on first before we did that, not least how much money we've got left.
Okay, I've Councillor Rose and then the Chief Exec.
Thank you. Am I heard by everybody?
You are indeed.
Thank you very much. 2 things I'd like to just refer to. Section 3.10, just in the notes, does give me great reassurance that fraud is being kept a close eye on. And I think from what we've heard already, it is a process whereby anybody trying to sneak in a little added extra will find that they can't do that. So I felt reassured by that. Another aspect of it, which I felt again reassured by, was section 3.4, the fact that there is a local aspect to this, that there is an appreciation that there are variations with respect to locality and the businesses, the types of businesses that we here in Craven wish to be able to support. So I thought those 2 points particularly were worth noting. With respect to the first round, pardon me, of grants, from personal experience, I want to say how very much they are appreciated. I work, as you know, for a charity that benefited from, pardon me, a payment, and that has been a lifesaver, if I can say that in no uncertain terms. And a friend of mine who has a small business, again, received a grant and was very impressed by the speed with which the payment was made. So again, just to underline what other people have said, very much appreciated the hard work that's gone into all of this and how very much it has helped relieve a lot of stress and worry. So very many thanks to all concerned. Thank you.
Great. I'll go to Linda before I come to you, Paul, if that's all right. Linda, Councillor Brockbank.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quickie. My concern is around here, we have a lot of self-employed general builders and gardeners as well. And they, even though they, through social distancing, they probably could have worked, they weren't able to get hold of the materials. And so therefore they weren't able to work. Now, and plasterers as well. In the food bank, we've had plasterer come in and various other people who just were not able to work because of lack of the materials. It would take some time for me to trawl around those people to identify them. Is there any way that we can identify them at all? Because a lot of them won't have paid rates on any buildings because they tend to have, they might have some sort of a garage somewhere, or so it won't be buildings that they've paid rates on. So I don't think we'd even know about them. How can we capture those people?
Richard, do you want to try that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a great answer, but it comes back to why we had to do the application process. It's just because we don't know about them. So when it was through the business rate system, we do, because they're in the system. But you know, we're not paying anything to people in respect of their business in that sense. So we don't know about them officially. You know, I mean, there is other support available to you know, through the self-employed support and other things. But again, we don't control that, and we're not privy to who those people are. So that was the whole thrust really of having to do what we've done, was to try and invite people to apply, because we just don't know who's out there unless they're already officially known to us. You know, there are some, so for example, on the you know, B&Bs, we deal with B&Bs through environmental health, so we were able to get a feel for who they are and whether they're registered properly with us, etc. But there's other groups out there that officially we just don't know about. Hence, we had to go through an application process.
I think a lot of this, Linda, as well, is that, like a plasterer tomorrow, with the £2,500 they probably can go out and buy a couple of bags of plaster, put a bit of fuel in his van, and go back to work. Some of these businesses, you know, they just can't start up overnight. You know, they require funds to get back going again, to get themselves back into gear. So, like, we'd love to help everybody. I mean, it's a bit like I'm sort of sceptical of the taxi drivers a bit, because the one-man bands, if you know what I mean. And yes, they've struggled, but if they've had the self-employed, they have had some funding to keep them fed and watered, if you know what I mean, through it. The problem was it came late, didn't it, the self-employed? You know, they were literally without any income for quite a while and waiting to get on income support, which a lot of self-employed people also went on to. So maybe they aren't the ones that we're trying to help, those that can go out and start up again relatively simply. You know, the job's still probably there, half finished in a house somewhere that you need to go back and plaster. a bit like me and a 90-year-old person in the house, and therefore you don't really want to go anywhere near. So there's, you know, there's got, we'll have to look at this, won't we, as they come through, Richard, and just check that these, you know, it's, we have put that we want businesses that are, you know, struggling and haven't really seen a large financial impact on themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these businesses were forced closed. The plaster actually wasn't forced closed. They just probably didn't have any work to go to. Yeah. But back to you, maybe, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, it was just to say as well, you know, we publicised the scheme when it opened, and we did another drive on that toward the end of last week. You know, the members have all had the details a couple of times now, so we've sort of tried to do as much as we can do in terms of the publicity and awareness. And you're right, we just need to see what the final numbers are when the thing closes at the end of the week.
Simon, then Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think again to emphasise the discretionary nature of this, because there's no one size fits all. There will be plasterers who have worked non-stop since lockdown started. There'll be taxi drivers who have borrowed money to purchase vehicles that are adapted for people with special needs, who will have that outgoing monthly and haven't been able to work. And I think that's the point of it being discretionary. You're going to have to look at those cases and decide, you know, who needs the help most. It's really not questionable, one size fits all. So yeah, a lot of more work for officers, I'm afraid, but you'll get even more praise at the end of it.
Paul, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points, really. One is, you know, the complexity of actually putting the scheme together and administering it really is difficult, and, you know, wholeheartedly agree with the work that's gone in, and thanks to the staff that have developed this, Richard and Deborah in particular. And then just a point of clarification, really, and that is the 51,000 has been mentioned a couple of times. The scheme is quite explicit on page 7 of the policy, the second bullet point there, where it says, you know, rateable values of 51,000 or more, no discretionary business grant shall be awarded. It is absolutely clear. So I wouldn't like to give the impression to the businesses out there with rateable values of 150,000, for example, that they can come to us on this particular scheme as it stands. It is absolutely clear. So I just wanted to make sure that members understood that point, and that we don't start to give missed messages to businesses out there.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the complexities about the scheme. In the scheme itself, the sections 3.4 to 3.6 are the mandatory elements, and basically everything else in there is the areas that it's primarily and predominantly aimed at. So it's primarily and predominantly aimed at businesses with a rateable value below 51,000. But in terms of this scheme, whilst that was a mandatory requirement in the previous one, it isn't technically in this. The mandatory elements are those 3 points, 3.4 to 3.6 in the scheme. And that's one of the it's the type of issue that's made this difficult to deal with, is distinguishing between those elements that are primarily and predominantly required to be supported, but actually aren't mandatory, and the sort of 3 mandatory bits that are.
Yeah, I think again, it's discretionary. We're going to look at those businesses if we think they've gone through serious hardship because of this. We do have that discretion to go above that 51, but it's not a £250,000 business that could have taken out a very cheap loan and that sort of thing. Would probably, well, a grant of 25,000 probably what isn't going to affect them. They're either going bust or they're not through this without us giving them 25 grand.
Yeah.
I think they'll have the receivers in.
Well, I mean, some of the, I mean, you know, without getting into all of the detail, the bigger businesses with chains and what have you tend to get caught by the state aid parts of this anyway. So some of those on the initial scheme where we've not paid them, it's because they've not claimed in this area, but they might well have claimed in another. But because in total they'd exceed the state aid limits, and that would apply to this as well.
I don't appear to have any more hands. Anybody else wishing to speak? I'm looking around my screen for anybody waving madly. We could probably do this by consensus, but we probably have to have a practice vote, Vicky. So I've had it moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Myers. Do you want to go around everybody, Vicky, and check that they're in agreement or whatever?
Yes, if you don't mind, Chairman, if I just call your name out and if you could say whether you're for, against or abstaining, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Councillor Barrett.
In favour.
Councillor Brockbank.
In favour.
Councillor Ireton.
For.
Councillor Liss.
For.
Councillor Morell.
For.
Councillor Mulligan.
For.
Councillor Myers.
For.
Councillor Noland.
For.
Councillor Place.
For.
Councillor Rose.
For.
Councillor Soloway.
For.
Councillor Welsh.
For.
Councillor Wheeler.
For.
And obviously, Chairman, you've moved it, so I presume you're for. Thank you. That concludes the vote. Thank you. So that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicky. Items of confirmation met.
Thank you, Chair. There are no items.
So on that note, members, thank you very much. It's not too onerous, I don't think, to do it in this format for now, and maybe on sort of like one agenda items on policy committees in the future, we'll continue to do it and maybe do more. I don't know. I think we need to make that decision. But thank you very much. I think everybody's got used to the mute button and the hand up, so once we get around those technicalities, I think it works fairly well. So thank you all very much, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.